And it's recorded, right?
Yeah, I'll just check everyone's happy with that at the beginning.
Okay. I'm gonna hide.
Okay, thank you. Just give it a few more minutes for latecomers and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll get started. I don't want to keep people waiting. Hi everybody, thank you for joining this morning. I'm sure we're all trying to get through our lists for the long weekend and get out there and enjoy some of this lovely warmth. Not quite so sunny today, but still warm. We thought it'd be a good time, timely really, to start a conversation or continue a conversation really around what the kind of return to work, if you like, or return to workspaces is going to mean for London's workspaces and what people's new kind of working patterns might mean and how we might be able to help each other prepare as Londoners start to return to the workplace. So that was the reason that we thought now would be a good time to have this conversation. I'm really happy to have an amazing panel of all women, woo, to join me here this morning. But before we get into the conversation, just to let you know how it's all going to go, we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up to see who's with us today. Then we're going to have about a half-hour conversation with the panel, people who are on the screen. And then we're going to go into a more interactive exercise using a tool called Menti, which Imelda will guide us through. Because we had quite a high number of sign-ups, we switched to webinar format, which means that in order to ask questions, you need to put your questions either into the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen or into the chat. And you can also raise your hand, although I don't think, as non-panelists, I don't think you can speak. Before we get started, I wanted to check if anyone has any objections to us recording the session so that we can share it afterwards. So please raise your hand using the buttons at the bottom of the screen if you have an objection to us recording now. And if we don't get a raised hand, we will record the session. Okay, I'm going to take that as good to go. So Imelda, I'm going to pass over to you, if that's all right. And perhaps you could just guide us through. I just want to do some introductions and find out who's with us this morning.
Amazing. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here with you all. I am not a panelist. You have fantastic panelists. I am just your tech support and your energy booster. So we're going to be using a platform called Menti. It's an anonymous platform. It's very fun. I do recommend if you're on your computer, just logging onto your phone to use it. So I'm going to write some details in the chat and I'm going to share my screen. So if you would like to visit www.menti.com, and when you arrive there, if you can use the code, 23632330, and then if you want to give us a quick heart when you're in the space, I can see a couple of hearts, give us some love, make us know that you're there, I can see 2 hearts, and whilst you're all logging on, I'll explain a little bit more about the questions. So we'll just be doing some fun questions. As I say, they're all anonymized. So what that means is that your name isn't going to be flashing up. We've got some open-ended questions. We have some ones where you can choose multiple options, and it's just going to wake you up this morning. As Alison said, it's sunny, but probably not sunny enough. So we need a bit of a different energy booster. Okay, so I'm going to go to the first slide. I think we have enough coming in. So guys, the first question, if you haven't managed to make it onto Menti, please do feel free to just write it in the chat. So the first question is a very serious question. What did you have for breakfast this morning? What did you have for breakfast this morning? I had chocolate for breakfast yesterday, so I wasn't very healthy. I had an apple for breakfast this morning. Nothing. We have cereal. Guys, this is a word cloud. So the bigger that the word pops up, that means the more people have had it. Apple, coffee, whiskey. I want to know whoever's having whiskey for breakfast. I want to be joining you for breakfast. Cup of tea, granola, cinnamon crunch, cereal's pretty big, porridge. We've got banana sandwich. Hector's saying porridge in the chat. Carl says black coffee in the chat. Guys, if you're all writing in the chat, make sure you're doing it to all panelists and attendees, so everybody can see what you had for breakfast this morning. Nout, love that, very, very specific. Nothing. Thomas, nout.
A goat.
A goat. We've also had a goat. Fantastic. Dolphins. We've got a real range of breakfast this morning. Amazing. Noodles, interesting breakfast. Sunshine seems like the best breakfast. Sausage and egg McMuffin. Dolphins is getting bigger. So I had a few people had dolphins for breakfast this morning. Amazing. And the person who wrote whiskey, if you want to message me after so we can go for breakfast together, I think that would be perfect. Okay, guys, that's a nice warm-up. And then for the next question, we have... Okay, so we're just trying to understand, I think, who is in the room. So what do you consider that you work for? So we've got three options here. We have a local or regional authority, a workspace provider, or are you an interested bystander? I love this one with all the dots. So we can see them all. We can see them all moving. So let's see which one fills up the most. We've had 21 votes so far. Couple more. If not, you can feel free to write in the chat as well. Okay, so it looks like we have a lot of interested bystanders. Today we have 11 interested bystanders, 6 workspace providers, and 5 local or regional authorities. A last entry for workspace providers, 8 workspace providers. Almost enough for a football team. Okay. And the last question before I hand back over to Alison is, are you most interested in inner London or outer London? Let's have a look. They're all flying in. Yeah, we've got 20 votes. We'll give another couple more. Very even split, I think, today. Okay, so you have 12 votes for inner London, 13, sorry, and 10 for outer London. Amazing. So just before I hand back over to Alison, guys, we will be using Menti after the fireside chat. It will be on the same link. If you're on your phone, you can feel free to open your phone. If not, I will put it back in the chat. Last one in, sorry, Alison. We have 13 for inner London and 11 for outer London. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and I'll hand back over to Alison.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Imelda. Thanks for your help. So interesting, deliberately didn't put a both option in the inner London and outer London questions. I kind of wanted to see and force people to vote for one or the other. So interesting to have a kind of equal split. So we're going to go straight into the panel discussion. Without further ado, the questions we're going to answer, we're kind of been, I was struck by an article which talked about multimodal working. And obviously we're all talking about how the pandemic has, is likely to have changed our working patterns forever. And we'll probably never return to a 5-day per week commute. I hope we will never return to a 5-day per week commute. And there's lots of different speculation about what this means for London and about the future of work and the future of work patterns, talk of hub and spoke, multimodal working. but everyone seems to think that the future of work will be much more flexible. So we were keen to bring everyone together to think about what this might mean for London's workspace providers and local authorities and other stakeholders. So I'm Alison Partridge. I'm Managing Director of One Tech at Capital Enterprise. I also lead on our workspace portfolio. So Alice, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Alice Fung. I'm an architect and director at Architecture 00. Also have experience in operating a couple of co-working spaces, namely Impact Hubs and the Health Foundry. I'm also a member of the Workspace Advisory Group, which provides advice to the Mayor of London on affordable workspace.
Alice, do you want to give a shout out to your recent pamphlet?
Yeah, thank you. And we recently working with the LEAP, the London LEAP, to publish a pamphlet on how we might introduce more flexible workspaces on our high streets. I'll post the link for those of you that might be interesting. Thank you.
Anyone who hasn't seen it, do take a look. It's a really, really amazing piece of work. Congratulations, Alice. Naima, do you want to go next?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Naima Almaston-Milsom. I'm Managing Director of London Business Partnership. I also run the programme on behalf of the GLA called the Shared Workspace Programme, where we've been delivering lots of webinars and one-to-one in terms of property advice and service. And also I've been involved with Capital Enterprise in designing and delivering the pilot's accreditation scheme.
Thanks, Naima. And next to Jane, please.
Hi, I'm Jane Sutton. I'm the Executive Director of the Flexible Space Association, which is the UK-wide trade association for flexible workspace. But we have quite a lot of members in London, running around 350 locations in London. And I'm also a member of the Mayor of London's Workspace Advisory Group.
Thank you, Jane. And yes, I'm also a member of the Mayor of London's Workspace Advisory Group and worked with Naima on the Workspace Accreditation pilot last year, and previously also led the research into the workspace affordability crisis back in 2018 and 2019. And just generally very interested in this topic of the return to work, workspace provision, inner London, outer London, all these different kind of potential outcomes, which we probably won't know about for several years and will continue to evolve, I'm sure. So I've got a few questions for the panelists. I'm going to come to Jane first. Jane, can you tell me a little bit with your background? Obviously, you've got a sort of UK-wide remit, as I understand it, but particularly thinking about London, how do you think workspace providers that you're in touch with are preparing for the return to work?
So in terms of preparing for the return, I guess the first thing is that for most of them, they have been open throughout the pandemic. So that kind of more practical preparation of ensuring that their communal areas and are COVID secure, and that they are able to advise customers on private offices where that's necessary. So they've been open throughout, because there have been key worker businesses that have been operating from all types of workspace, and people that need to run their businesses and haven't been able to work from home. So I think that's probably key. But clearly it's the expectation now is that we'll be seeing an increase in people looking to return to workspaces. And I think the flexible workspace providers in particular could see that there is a real opportunity for that sector with the new working arrangements that I think the reality is, in the main, we're not going to see people return to offices 5 days a week. But everyone made working from home work when we had to, but there are a lot of benefits to be gained from being in office space or shared workspace. So I think there is a growing feeling that is going to happen more and more, and maybe it'll be 2 or 3 days a week in an office. And I think flexible workspace in particular is seeing that opportunity, and also wanting to be there to help get the UK economy flying again, and providing that sort of communal space for people to come together.
Mute. Thank you. Just a follow-up, if I may. Do you think there are any specific challenges that they're facing? I mean, in terms of I guess there are physical adaptations, thinking about different communities, different audiences. Are there any challenges or opportunities that we need to be aware of, do you think?
I think there's a lot of challenges, I think, for everybody at the moment. There are challenges, and clearly a lot of this work, particularly on COVID secure measures, doesn't come cheap, and people have needed to make sure that those arrangements are in place. So that's definitely been a challenge. But people clearly want to ensure that their customers and future customers have got the confidence to come back to workspaces or to take space for the first time in them. And I think, as I said, there are opportunities there for that sector, and I think increasingly people are looking to where they can either start up, and we're hearing a lot about new businesses looking for space, and often that is the type of space where new businesses begin, and then also people looking for space maybe nearer to home than they were before. And so I think yeah, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists want to comment on that question before I move on to the next question? Alice, you came off mute. No?
Just preparing myself, sorry.
So the next question is for Alice. One of the sort of forecasts from people in the know is that some of the corporates, some of the larger companies will be looking for workspace potentially for their staff closer to where their teams live and work. So how do you think we can help London's workforce and their employers, big or small, to both find and use independent workspaces, particularly workspaces maybe who only have one site or only in one location? How can we help awareness of those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, like anecdotally, I think certainly it seems to be something that many businesses, small to large, are kind of considering, and each kind of day almost we kind of hear about some other sort of FTSE 100 or very large kind of companies saying that they're looking to kind of reduce or kind of offer kind of work from home kind of, yeah, sort of into the future. And so I think there's going to be this big period of acclimatization for especially those companies, organizations, not just large, but also small culturally, and therefore informationally not very familiar with what does the kind of this hybrid work, flexible working mean for them. And so I think something that would be really useful is almost kind of some basic how-to guides from the sector. So some basic things. I think those of us that have had experience operating those independent workspaces probably know what those basic questions kind of might be. So from both an employee and also an employer perspective, well, what does it involve? And so it's this kind of, yeah, top 10 questions kind of we always keep getting asked to help get the ball rolling. And then I think additionally there's always the kind of the access to the information, trying to kind of find out who geographically is in my area if I'm an employee, but also for employers, for those that have an understanding of what the kind of commute patterns look like, so that they can kind of target those areas. So the closest thing I know at the moment is the GLA kind of workspaces map, which obviously maps many of the kind of workspace providers that we're speaking about. But I think that could probably even go further, and should be more of a kind of collective effort perhaps from so many of the other providers that are starting to kind of crop up basically. But I think that as a kind of an easy search, and we know working with people like Hubble and those, when people are generally searching for flexible workspaces, kind of coming up kind of in their area, that they do the Google search. That's how we often find people coming to us. And I think it might be coordinating some of that kind of basic how-to guide with those sorts of platforms might go some way to those that are perhaps uninitiated in this sort of sector. And then I think just kind of a slightly separate point is this idea about kind of hybrid work or multimodal work. How have we end up sort of phrasing it? There'll be certainly nuances. I don't think it's a kind of this either or of working at home all working in the office. I think there will also be this kind of shift in how people come together. So in our pamphlet, we mentioned sort of deep work. I think culturally, people will be looking at sort of how they engage within teams and across teams in different ways, which is more than just, well, let's just do a meeting at my office or your office. I think there's something about the relationship building, given the move probably to some shift to kind of more online ways of working like this, that will probably start to kind of emerge. And so enabling the kind of workforce and that access to workspace isn't just a desk-based space and isn't just the bookable meeting room, it's also where people can build relationships. So I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but I think that is, as an access to resource, will become something to perhaps kind of watch out for, and is an opportunity. And then the last thing is yeah, I think will come up later in the conversation as well, is kind of sort of the bulk purchase for employees, so they're not having to go to each, go down to the sort of granular level of each individual employee and trying to figure out what that contract is with that membership contract, albeit that flexible and independent workspaces tend to have very light touch contracts. I think even perhaps having something sort of standardized across in terms of terms and conditions in some way would enable, for example, an employer of 100, 200 sort of employees. Okay, well, right, maybe I have sort of 20, 50 people, but I don't want to go through 20 or 50 individual contracts. That, I think that sort of admin will kind of kill the flow of people being able to kind of just sign up. So
interesting, thank you, Alice. So some really good pointers there in terms of using Hub or using the Mayor's Workspace providers map. I think those are really useful. I know Maria and Jamie are on the call from the GLA. I don't know if they want to put those links into the chat so that people can access them. And also, do feel free to put other comments and questions in the chat which we can pick up during the conversation. I totally agree, Alice, that it's not going to be a simpler space and meeting rooms. I think this whole idea of the culture, the cultural piece is going to be fascinating to watch, and how we continue to build highly functioning teams through physical space, but also have the sort of remote working around the outside. I fear a little bit for independent workspace providers that if they do end up attracting lots of people who work for larger companies, I just wonder how they're going to be able to maintain that community sense and feel in their space. I think that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. And yeah, bulk purchase, if we're not careful, we're going to drive up pricing, and affordability is going to be right back on top of the agenda again. So that's something I think I agree, we also need to keep a sort of watching eye over. So John from Cap Enterprise is saying the most flexible workspace business model, there we go, requires occupancy rates of 70 to 80% to break even, which we're obviously way below at the moment. Can we expect to get back to this level of occupancy in the next 6 months, or is the business model bust? Does anyone want to take that question before we move on to the next one? Is the flexible workspace business model bust? Anyone want to dare to have a go at that one?
Well, I think that would be mainly talking about the inner and the outer London, because that's an issue that definitely will sort of have to be sort of considered here. So I think maybe the outer London, from my perspective, I think the question will come in a minute, is the outer London, I think, might do better than the inner London. And only time can tell. I really trying to find data at the moment and stuff, and there's nothing really sort of telling us exactly what would happen. But definitely looking at the sort of the use of even towns, squares and in outer London areas and sort of suburban areas, how they've been really used far more than the inner London. And that just can tell you, is this sort of walk into work, is this going to come up? So it's a thing to watch out for, really. So I think we'll come to the next question, and I'll talk. Do you
want to take that question now? Yeah. While we're on the topic. So
yeah, okay, yeah, and I think on that topic, yeah, absolutely, it's more about sort of I mean, I've sort of been looking. we've been running the shared workspace program. We've been, working with Capital Enterprise with an accreditation scheme. So there've been quite a lot of talks, and also I run a sort of monthly event with London Assembly and the co-working London Assembly, and it's been really sort of just listening to what everybody's saying, and then I went and sort of trying to find some data on what is this inner London and outer London, and I think definitely looking at sort of what is about 30% of the workforce have worked from home, and lots of them are not looking at going back. So it's sort of, if we're thinking about that and thinking people are not going back to their offices. So, and yet we got, especially when it comes to young people, those people, I don't want to be working from home either, because I'm also a business advisor. So I've been listening to loads of businesses going, I'm just fed up of having to work from, from my desk to my, especially for people who are working in the small places or live in small places. So we're just having to really think about how is it going to be, so we know that, there is a YouGov poll that said that employers and workers are really thinking about not, things are not going to go back to how it used to be. So it's sort of, what is it, so how are we going to really, the outer London are going to definitely be more, because we have more people living in the suburban areas. There's more people who just looking at sort of walking to work sort of initiative that's coming up at the moment, is having to how is that going to work? And then listening to Alice and how you're going to put this model together if a big company that has people living all over the country, how are we going to do it? But definitely from what I've been all seeing, I think the outer London workspaces and co-working and flexible workspace and all that will definitely have more take up going forward in the inner London.
Thanks, Naima. Interesting chat from Hive Hub in Barking, who's saying that they're having more inquiries from employees rather than employers. And a lot of this, if I've understood the comment correctly, is about sort of is educating people to move away from the sort of cost per square foot metric to actually valuing workstation and cultural environment and sort of wraparound offer, which is obviously something we've touched on quite a lot in the work we've been doing on the accreditation as well. I'm going to park the questions. Go on, Naima.
Sorry, just to add into that, because one of the things that came up recently is the employers are not really they trust their employees now. The system has been tested that they can work away from the office. It's not about working from home and away from the office. So the thing that came up at the moment is more about mental health and people sort of how they're feeling and employers. So if the government and also local governments and workspaces, everybody talk together, get together, sort of try and come up with something there, definitely the employers will come on board, because there is that sort of element of worrying about the employees' mental health.
I agree. I might switch off script if people don't mind, because the questions in the chat are much better than my questions, actually. So we might just go into more of a question from the chat if people don't mind. We'll come back to my questions if we've got time. But one of the questions in the chat is about what does multimodal working mean for more resident-focused organisations like local authorities, especially in terms of being connected with communities. That's a really vital part of a local authority's work. So what do you think this kind of shift is going to mean for organisations who are sort of concerned with the sort of geographical community and the demography within that geographical community? Any thoughts on that?
Sorry, I just kind of replied in the chat, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's huge opportunities for kind of the multimodal style of work. I mean, essentially it means that people aren't spending kind of 8 hours effectively kind of like in one location. They're splitting their time more locally, and I think that there's therefore opportunities for local neighbourhoods to be providing services, and therefore perhaps more locally based businesses, or kind of those that are serving not just then sort of residents, which is outside of work hours. And I realise there I'm putting a big blanket as to kind of what work hours are, and it isn't always just 9 to 5 and so on. But yeah, I think that may make the more local service provision more viable, because when you're probably not seeing as much of a outflux of people kind of getting onto the tube, going into kind of like work, and that'll be spread more across the day. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. I mean, I guess what's really clear from all of this is that information, intelligence, and conversations like these are going to be really important. I'll just take a moment while I remember to flag the fact that the GLA have also commissioned Jamie, who may well be on the call. He's going to be doing regular surveys of workspaces over the next 18 months to try and capture some of that, the trends and some of the sort of challenges that workspace providers are facing as we sort of hopefully emerge from the pandemic. So if you're not aware of that survey, do get in touch and I can forward your information to Jamie, who's leading on that piece of work. Jane, I might come to you now, if that's okay, on the sort of issue of how single site providers stand compared to multi-site providers in London. Obviously, we've got some big commercial providers in London. We've also got the sort of single site independent providers. How do you think that's going to work out over the next few months?
And there is, as you say, a real mix. And I guess there's, for the companies themselves, there's pros and cons, isn't there? And sometimes if you're part of a much bigger organisation, then you have access to expertise and support in doing things at scale. But if you're a single site, or maybe one or two, then you can be much more sort of fleet of foot in terms of adapting to the opportunities that exist, and also knowing what's needed in your local community. And I think particularly as we seem to be heading towards this more, not working at home but working near to home, then it might be those independent providers that are much better placed to take those opportunities up and to be able to adapt their space. And I've heard from some of our members that are looking to repurpose some of their space, perhaps including meeting rooms, to co-working space, because they can see that those are opportunities, and maybe smaller offices as well. So I think there is that opportunity if you're smaller, although obviously if it's bigger companies do have perhaps a bit more sort of reassurance in terms of backing. And in very general terms, in that sort of inner and outer London aspect that we've touched on, the inner London public, where you need to be using more public transport to get to offices, is clearly still the big challenge at the moment, and is going to continue to be. So again, there's that difference between those types of providers.
Are you seeing any evidence or having any conversations with workspace providers who maybe larger workspace providers who are multi-site and have focused their operations in inner London so far? Is there any evidence that they're starting to buy up spaces in outer London? Is anyone aware of anything like that happening?
I think it's certainly something that everyone's looking at, because there is particularly the hub and spoke approach and the need for more regional workspace, and also workspace on the high street as well, and those opportunities, and some of these, particularly where you're looking at conversions of department stores into workspace, then some of those are going to be the bigger operators that are able to do what is a very substantial project to take that opportunity up.
Mm-hmm. There's a really interesting thread in the chat around how all of this links with the kind of climate change agenda and sort of zero energy or zero carbon agenda. And is this an opportunity actually to drive some change in that area? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? There's a question as to whether or not there are grants for solar panels and electric boilers. That's a very specific question. But any thoughts as to whether or not we think this is an opportunity from a climate change perspective? Alex?
I think that there may be sort of pros and cons. I guess there's, so there's the sort of travel aspect, of course, but there's on the perhaps flip side, how we kind of might end up converting or retrofitting sort of spaces to support flexible workspaces, which some might consider a pro, but at the same time, if it's only for a very short period of time because of considerations of business rates and rents and so on, and given the new use class E, the fact that say high street units can flip between workspace and retail, and currently landlords are set up to just go for whatever the highest rent is, there's a danger that we end up sort of doing very short-term projects and having a negative impact in a way on sort of on the kind of sustainability agenda from sort of that perspective. But that said, you know, sort of like the general idea of kind of shared resource and perhaps not each company needing as large a footprint as it needs with all that comes with it, it could potentially be sort of a big gain footprint wise, but I mean, I think that requires quite a high degree of kind of coordination. And then flipping again, I think, you know, the sort of the 15-20 minute neighborhood, you know, people walking, so there's a kind of a health and well-being kind of agenda there. Sorry, not quite kind of the climate change kind of one. But I think, you know, we could see this as a kind of a kickstart to how we approach our high streets as different types of spaces, and that a more collective kind of approach to the high streets might be the biggest kind of changer in terms of impacting kind of climate change. So if there is a more coordinated effort across multiple units, I think that's generally where, you know, so things like solar panels or kind of like, you know, maybe not kind of, I don't know about sort of heat pumps and so on, but in terms of solar panels, being able to coordinate energy efforts across multiple units is something that might be worthwhile kind of considering. But it's the coordination, I think, that it kind of comes back to. It's moving away from the fragmentation of use, whether it's kind of office or whether it's high street units and so on.
Thanks, Alice. So yeah, on coordination then, I'm going to come to Jane now. One of the things that we've been thinking about at Cap Enterprise is whether or not, and I know you're going to tell me this already exists, so but the question was, is there a model where workspace providers in London could have a sort of shared membership offer? So an employee or employer could buy a pass which gives them access and membership at a number of different spaces. So something similar to sort of Class Pass, but for workspaces. Jane, can you say whether or not you think that's a good idea, viable thing? You said earlier that you think this already exists, so tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, and there are and have been for a while pre-pandemic. I think people are seeing this as an opportunity to set up platforms and sign up workspace operators to join that platform, and then people buy a subscription that enables them to use desks where they happen to be. And I've seen in the last couple of weeks outside of London, but a small town where somebody is looking to set up a system to enable people who would otherwise be working from home to find a desk somewhere else, just in that small town. So I think it is something that people are certainly looking at, and clearly larger operators are able to offer that within their different locations. And I think, when I was in the good old days traveling much more around London and different meetings, I certainly, at one point I was diving into coffee shops to work, but then I got a membership pass to one of our bigger members, and that made the world of difference, being able to sit down somewhere for a couple of hours. So I definitely think, it should be seen as an opportunity, I think. There is potential for downsides if every worker became very transitory onto where they were working, but I don't think that would happen in a very significant way. So I would see it more as an opportunity to sort of embrace this new flexible way of working, where you're not tied to one desk in one office.
Right, I'm loving the optimism, Jane. I'm loving that everything's an opportunity. It's good, thank you.
Can I just add? Can I just add to that? Yeah, because we through the shared workspace program we've been running, and one of the webinars we did was about membership, and it was one of the most popular one because everyone wanted to learn. Lots of co-working providers wanted to learn how others are offering, what sorts of membership, how does it work. So examples would be really, really useful for co-working spaces to see it working and how it works in practice, not just for the big providers, but also for the small providers. And even looking at sort of how they can get together and put some membership. That's definitely something that we should, it should be shared. It's somebody in the state looking at something like Airbnb sort of type model, sort of thing for workspace. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to get at. Is there a way that the average sort of office worker can access a platform and book and buy a pass that gives them access to lots of different places operated by different independents. And I guess, you know, the larger providers who are multi-site will be setting themselves up to do just that. But is there a way that independents can come together and put together an offer? I think that would be a really interesting thing. We'll come on to that a bit more in a minute. Before we come to the final question, there's an interesting conversation in the chat around how we're kind of talking here really only about office workers, and therefore probably ignoring a large proportion of London's population who actually don't have the privilege of being able to work in an office or work from home. And yeah, I completely agree. We are talking probably predominantly here about people who are able to work in offices and in co-working spaces. But do any of you want to comment on the fact that this is going to create yet another divide in society?
I mean, I guess my comments would be that it's more of an aspiration. I'm not sure how realistic it is, but you know, I agree. Yes, the kind of the flexible working obviously only works for a kind of a certain sort of portion of kind of society, but the hope would be that being able to work more locally then also drives certain services, a spread of services and businesses and everything to be a little bit more local. And you know, a consideration of the kind of service-led jobs is generally that people can't have to travel quite far to provide the service from where they live, and so I think a slightly less sort of polarized city and a more local city would hopefully provide more opportunities. I don't know if that is realistic, but that would be the aspiration.
Right, thank you. Naima, did you want to add anything?
I think, reading through some documents, I can't really quote which article. I'll be happy to have a look and put it there. There was, just to sort of say what Alice has just said, it's really the working locally will drive, you know, like barbers, hairdressers, the deli, the cafes, more at a local level, because they're not, you know, the workers are not going you know, to other places. So that's maybe will get those work, you know, that there is a research there which I'm trying to sort of see if I can find the link and I can send it to people to look at. And so we will be looking at that sort of that workforce. But also, I mean, I know there's quite lots of people who are, you know, 100K and above, but there is also lots of admin work and lots of other sort of workers that will be working from home, and lots of those small, for me, working with SMEs, the small sorts of employers, and lots of them are looking at co-working spaces, looking at how they can locate their staff into small sorts of providers across. So hopefully we will see a range happening. Yeah.
Sorry, Alison, I'm just seeing, so David's mentioned that obviously co-working, we're saying co-working, but in a way, when talking about flexible workspace, we are talking about more than sort of people at laptops and so on. There are a whole raft of types of workspaces that we're looking at, sort of small micro F&B, food production, sort of studio, makerspace, you know, like all those sorts of things. And again, I think just the idea of flexible workspace and people becoming more kind of commonplace and something that's more commonly understood. We're seeing it in sort of mainstream kind of, you know, kind of papers and so on now. It can only encourage like landlords as well to kind of be thinking about how you know, the kind of the properties that they own can be used for something other than classic office or classic retail. I mean, there's just a whole raft of different types of uses. So while that's a kind of maybe a secondary impact, I think it is an important one.
Yes, I agree. But nevertheless, I mean, I totally acknowledge David's point as well, and I understand that. But nevertheless, there will always be people who cannot, you know, work from home or from a shared space because of their employers. And I guess we could argue that they will not have the same degree of flexibility that others might now have access to, I guess. So yes, someone's just asked if we're able to save the chat. I'm just going to ask Laurel, who is sitting behind the Capital Enterprise logo, if she can take responsibility for trying to save the chat so that we can circulate it afterwards, because you're right, there are some really useful links there. I can't keep on top of it, which is a good problem to have as a facilitator of one of these panels. So we're going to almost wrap up the chat now before we go into the interactive exercise. One last question for the three of you. We're obviously in a pre-election period at the moment. I'm not allowed to make, or we can say what we want, but there are people from the GLA who can't make political statements at the moment. If you had one message for the future Mayor of London, whoever he or she may be, or they may be, what would it be? Alice, do you want to go first?
Putting me on the spot. Yeah, I mean, I think really about sort of this kind of call to action to kind of like share information, and so that it's also not just coming from sort of either public or private sector. I think that's something that the mayor could really support.
Yep. Jane?
I think when the time's right, doing whatever is possible to give people confidence to go back to the workplaces. And I think particularly the concern that we're hearing from our London-based members is public transport is potentially the barrier to that. So anything that can be done to give people confidence to get back to wherever it is they want to work.
Thank you. And Naima?
Gosh, I didn't really think about that, but here you go. I'm just going to talk about more support for the SMEs and make sure that you know what's happening at the moment. So just getting working with workspaces with SMEs, try and get everybody on the table, creating more jobs around London will be. From my perspective, I'm a bit worried about inner London and what's going to happen. So that's.
It's a long time since we've worried about inner London, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm really keen if people want to put comments in the chat as to what they think the message for the Mayor of London ought to be, the future Mayor of London. We're keen to collect those comments. I really agree on the business rates piece and potentially the sort of rent control piece as well. I think, you know, in order to drive occupancy up, prices are going to have to stay real everywhere in London. And I do have this concern that affordability might go out the window if people with a bit more money start getting into the flexible workspace market, which would not be a bad thing per se, but it could actually drive prices up and make it unaffordable for other people. So Imelda, I hope you're still there. We're going to jump back into Menti and try and get a little bit more feedback from participants. So I'm going to hand back to you. Okay, thank you so much to the panel. You're going to stay on the screen and help me hopefully debrief from some of these exercises. Really appreciate your insights and optimism, I think, above all this morning. So Imelda, over to the next question on Menti.
Amazing. I'm just going to put the Menti back in the chat for everybody, just in case you missed it. But it's the same link and the same code as before. So I'm going to share my screen. So this is a question. Again, it's all anonymous. So if you would, if you can go on your phones or on your laptops, if you want to use the code 23632330, same as before. And the question that we're asking, and obviously this one's one for you guys, is if you are a workspace operator, what challenges are you facing when preparing for workers to return? So if you'd just like to pop over to Menti and you can write that in the chat. So we've got one come in, nice bright and green, all in caps, boosting confidence. So one of the challenges that we're facing when preparing for workers to return is boosting confidence. So that's obviously a really big issue that's happening. If anybody else has any other comments, then if you just want to write them in and they will pop up on the screen. Somebody says, will they return? That's a very good question. Someone says, will they return? One of the challenges when facing for them to return is questioning whether they're going to return at all. So I think that's an important one. Okay, another challenge, somebody said that they're based in zone 1 and people have stopped commuting. That's definitely a challenge I think that's being faced. Understanding our versus employer and individuals' liabilities. Predicting the level and type of demand. Yes, what does that return exactly look like? When's it going to come in? Is it going to come all at once, like the pubs and the bars, or is it going to be a slow trickle back? The vaccine has created a lot of ease in bringing people back. See people starting to come back, and think this will accelerate as more people have the vaccine. Somebody said we sell training rather than desks, and the challenge is so long online training has been accepted as free.
Barking is the new Shoreditch. I like that one.
Another challenge that somebody said is the government policies, better tech to meet even higher demand for flexibility, knowing when and how social distancing requirements will change. Somebody said another challenge is looking at pound per square foot versus all inclusive. I think you were discussing that a bit earlier.
So there's some trends here in terms of, like readying the space for more virtual conferencing and getting more tech for more coordination. And there were cost and resource implications here. And I think that we need to start thinking about what the cost and resource implications will be. So someone's just put in here, funding deferred VAT and business rates whilst investing in marketing. So important, totally agree. Renting meeting rooms for outsiders. Anyone else on the panel want to pick any of these out? Melda, can you scroll back up?
Yeah, of course. We also have Carl in the chat saying a lot of it is about people knowing that we are here, the services are needed, but we need to find new clients.
So there's a big awareness piece here as well, isn't there? There's an awareness piece in terms of, so adaptation piece, and there's a big awareness piece as well. So bring people back also to the map. You know, I think that's going to be really, really important, but maybe maybe more data is needed and more awareness of the data is needed as well.
Yeah, and there's been more demand for marketing and promotion and membership design. How can, that's been quite a lot from the flexible workspace.
Yeah. Okay, any more on this one?
The knowing when and how social distancing requirements will change, and just kind of like the liabilities part. I mean, I think, that's, I mean, on one hand, people say, oh, it's very kind of clear. And then others say, well, but I don't know how to translate that to kind of who actually sort of does what. I mean, I think it just requires the sort of the sector kind of just to exchange information. And, there's a little sort of partly sort of safety in numbers of having kind of exchange kind of like, well, what's your format? What are you asking members to kind of do in terms of like risk assessment on their side versus kind of risk assessment on the operator kind of side? And because I think it's constantly evolving. And so perhaps as a sector, there's something about sort of sharing that and having something that's kind of standardized across or at least shared as a template so that people know where they're working from.
Mm. So do you have any practical, I mean, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, Alice, and I apologise for that, but any thoughts on how we can, as a sort of, let's call it a movement, how we can work better together to share those experiences and share that information?
It's always kind of the tricky, I mean, Flexa is obviously, a kind of, a sort of platform perhaps for a forum for that. I'm not sure I've got any ready-made solutions. I think people on here probably also are aware of where people tend to sort of like congregate around sort of sharing that sort of best practice. I mean, I think we're all sort of like short on sort of like time, attention span and kind of resource, and that's the thing. It's having the confidence to kind of just throw something which is a part finished kind of document. So can anyone else have a other part of the jigsaw they can help me with? We're all sat there writing kind of like our own individual documents to try and figure out what covers us, like what is kind of guidance to our members and so on. It just feels like that could be effort that could be shared.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. And also I know there's quite a few people from the London Co-working Assembly on the call today, and that's another useful forum of exchange. They run regular events. I think they're running monthly events at the moment and having some really useful conversations. Jamie's put in the chat a guide that the GLA or Business Hub, I think, have prepared around, I think this is more around the practical implications of reopening within a COVID-19 context. And David says, yeah, costs are going up. I think we know that, but income is going down. So there's definitely there's a funding gap, there's a resource gap between what's actually needed and wanted, both by co-working space operators, workspace operators, and also by companies and the workers that work for them. So you could argue that public sector intervention is actually required because there's actually a market failure, dare I say it. Let's move on to the next question, Imelda.
Yep, no problem. So the next question is, how can we enable London's workforce and their employers to both find and use independent workspaces? It's the same set format as before. If you just want to write it on Menti, or alternatively, you can write it in the chat and I will check both. We'll give you a sec because it's probably not going to be a short answer. There's probably going to be a bit more of a complex answer to this question.
At the moment, the questions we got from the answers we got from the panel are very much around the workspace map that's on the Business Hub website, and websites like Hubble and others that exist, and a couple of others that are popping up. But this is like, you know, if you're a big employer or a small employer and you're looking to help your employees find spaces, how can we make sure they find the right spaces, the spaces that are offering community impact, are helping their local communities?
Okay, cool. So we've had a couple come through. So I've had hubblehq.com, which I know we've mentioned, I think during this chat. I've also said, somebody's put to stop talking about places like WeWork and start talking about local owner managed spaces.
Yeah.
Somebody else says engage with employers and get them to give their employees a co-working voucher. It's a good suggestion. Carl in the chat says there's a real need for London-wide or sub-regional marketing campaign. Tell employers about our offer and back it up with the research that shows that we're just not just a desk in a room.
I've got one that says B Corp for independent operators, ones that are invested in the local community and make a difference. I'm not sure who put that, but I would refer you to the workspace accreditation pilot that Naima and I were involved in last year, and I can send you a copy of that report, which did show that an accreditation is actually something that's really in demand in London, but sadly we haven't got anyone to fund it at the moment, and we don't think it can fund itself. But I completely agree. I think that ones that invested in the local community make a big difference. Back to you, Imelda.
We've also got somebody saying childcare. Hard for employees to go back to needing to pay for childcare out of school hours since the year that we've been at home. Flexible Space Association has online searchable database for its members, and they've got a fantastic other resource here. Get the government to say go back to work, which would be a good one. Work with London Business Hub, chambers, business support organisations. Agree the need to focus on local and high service environment. Somebody else has put a frictionless app that enables employees to choose their space and the employer to pay for it. Some apps like this do exist.
On that one, if anyone can put the links to the apps that do exist in the chat, that'd be great. If there are frictionless apps that enable that does that already, it'd be good to share them.
And then there's another one saying there's a lot of stuff from John and James at Instant Office that shares about big companies looking for local office space. Somebody else said there's hundreds of apps for finding workspace.
There are, but do people know about them?
I think those are all the ones. I don't know if any of the panel want to build on anything that's been said.
Sorry, I mean, has come up quite a lot, and it is really, out of all the events that we've been running, this is the question that we really need to be looking at. And flexible workspaces or local authorities or local organizations or the London Business Hub or GLO, we need to put something together here because there is an opportunity going forward, and it will be, this is the time for it to, either looking at the apps. It'd be good to see the link to the app. It'd be good to see link to any data, anything that is out there, and share it with everyone. It would be really useful.
Yeah. And Simon's just shared in the chat a link to one that's just sprung out of California, I believe. I was looking at it yesterday, actually, which does seem to be a kind of Airbnb model for workspaces, although I'm not sure it's solely focused on independent workspaces. I didn't get that sense, but it's an interesting model. Okay, any other points here before we move on? Just one more question, two more questions, but one more open question.
Somebody else has just written saying they have a list of apps that they can share, so
right.
as well.
That'd be great.
Okay, so the next question, and this is another quick poll. Would you be interested in exploring a model where people can have a membership offer that covers multiple spaces operated by different providers? Give people a little bit longer to respond. Okay, so we have some yeses, some nos. Guys, do feel free to vote. It's all anonymous, so we won't be tracking you down and asking you why you put what you put. And I don't think you'll be compelled to do anything with your answer. I think it's just a temperature gauge. Okay, cool. So we've got 17 votes. So 13 saying yes and 4 saying no. Mark's written in the chat saying these do exist already and many have failed. Okay, Alison, did you want to comment on this at all?
No, I think maybe we'll just adjust the next question a little bit, because the next question is, do you have any suggestions of how this might work? But I'm equally keen to hear from the people who think this is a bad idea. So take the next question as a sort of comment on this one. If you think it's a good idea, say a little bit more about how it could work, specifically for independent co-working providers, I'm thinking, and specifically linked to the return to work after the pandemic. So maybe something different to what's been done before. But so interested to know how that, if that might work, if it's been done before, is it worth exploring again in a different context? But also, if you said, no, this is a bad idea, we're keen to hear why.
Amazing. Bernie has written in the chat saying it's been tried hundreds of times and it bombs. There's lots of examples from the early days of the USA. So we'll move to the next question. Like Alison said, if anyone wants to comment or give a reason why you think it bombs or why you think it might be useful, I think that'd be really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are living in a different world. I think this is why we wanted to ask this question again. The world is a different place. So maybe it's bombed in previous contexts. Because there haven't been enough demand, but we're anticipating demand is changing. So yeah, interested to hear people's comments on this one.
Carl's also written in the chat saying, if it has failed before, has there been any analysis as to why it failed?
Yeah.
And Mark also says, immediately post-pandemic, we will still need to control numbers and manage expectations. So yeah, guys, if you just want to feel free to write a Menti, like Alison says, any comments or how you think it could work if you feel like anything has changed, and what the state of play looks like now.
I think we might have exhausted everyone, Amanda. It might be done.
Or they're writing very long descriptive answers. Okay, amazing. So somebody's come in and said that I just think individuals will mostly prefer to work from home if not in a larger central office. People are now able to have more choice about where they work. The time may be right for this. Carl has also said in the chat that the idea is a good one, shouldn't overcomplicate it. And Bernie has given some research. It's got dropped a link. Somebody's written saying, getting the fee sharing across multiple providers is hard, especially if I get less money as a provider than if I secured a tenant myself. Mark has also written in the chat saying that it failed due to tiny margins for operators of those systems and huge marketing costs and sign up sell. So again, a bit of a market failure potentially. If people and companies are saying they want access to workspaces are saying they want people and companies, but they can't. There is an affordability gap. Yeah. Somebody's written saying it seems like offices should be repurposed and refurbished for meeting spaces rather than just a few desks. Mm. Anyone else on the panel want to pick up on this one before we move on?
I think we are in changing times, really. And I remember having a conversation probably a couple of years ago about a company that was looking to use space in hotels and restaurants during the daytime for people to come and work in. I don't know whether that has gone anywhere. I haven't seen any mention of it in the last year or so. But I think that, you know, clearly Workspace is set up to provide workspace with all that it needs in the way that hotels and restaurants and coffee shops aren't. So I think I am aware that similar models have failed in the past, but it seems an interesting time to be exploring it again, because of the flexibility that people are going to have for where they work more.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just I've put in the chat, you know, like my own direct experience, and it's a very particular experience at Impact Hubs, where we so for those that don't know, the Impact Hubs it's an association of hubs. So it's not that it's not a standardized or kind of from the center type of model. So each hub has its own kind of operating system. So stuff wasn't necessarily sort of standardized, which was, I think, a bit of an issue. But we had this kind of hub global passport that allowed, you know, membership at one hub allowed you like 1 day a month at any other kind of hub. The main issue there was the sort of price point difference. So sort of, you know, King's Cross and its costs, real estate's costs are different from, you know, a location that isn't sort of like the CAS zone, for example. And so there's issues with that. But I think, again, I refer back to, I think that's where, if you're talking about sort of like hot desking, but I think there'll be different modes of working. So it's about thinking about, for example, when teams need to kind of come together and so on, which are kind of the more kind of curated spaces, as well as spaces that you might not find in a typical kind of office. For example, you might have standard meeting rooms and you might have a standard desk. But I'm wondering whether there are opportunities in that sort of thinking about the future of work, as opposed to thinking about the model as it currently exists and trying to get sort of, yeah, this kind of passport between spaces that have different cost needs and so on.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. There's some amazing stuff coming up in the chat. I'm struggling to keep up with it all, but yeah, Bernie pointed out, I think when you're talking about coffee shops, Jane, I think this was, Bernie's reminded us about the Other Ship. I think that was formerly known as We Coffee. I think they've rebranded themselves as the Other Ship recently. And then there's a comment about the need to sort of join up local provision better, local authorities facilitating that but not managing it. Bernie's put some more resource there about some research that's been done, and hotels are also looking how they can use their spaces for co-working. So wow, go on, Neymar.
The conversation also needs to be with the employers, the bill payers. Those need to be brought into the conversation and see what models would work for them as well. What are they looking for? And then that's, you know, I don't know who will join this conversation, but employers, not employees. No, I mean,
and I think that's probably the biggest difference at the moment, because I think the employers are looking at it, and even some of the, you know, the bigger ones are looking at local co-working opportunities for their teams, and teams, someone else put earlier, you know, in terms of the teams are also driving demand by exploring what's available around them in a way that they probably haven't before. So personally, I think that will be a good shift to more local working for all sorts of different reasons. But there will still be a need, as we've said several times already, you know, for people to come together for well-being, for productivity, for team working, for culture, for company culture reasons. Okay, I think we're probably done with the Menti. I think we're almost done with the session. I do like to give people a bit of their day back. So unless people have got other burning questions, I might just ask the panelists if they've got any final comments they want to make. If not, we will wrap up. Naima, any final comments or thoughts you want to share?
Gosh, put me on the spot. No, not really. I'll just come back to the let's start the conversation and let's get everybody in a room and let's coordinate this.
Yeah, thank you. Alice?
No, it's been a really good conversation. Sorry, I'm sort of deep in the chat. There's such great links there, such a body of knowledge sort of all around. So I think it's really trying to make use of that, really.
Thank you. And Jane?
Yeah, no, it's been a really interesting session. You picked me up on my reference to opportunities more than once, and it's clearly still a really challenging time. But I think people with the expertise in providing workspace that isn't just sort of standard corporate offices, there are going to be those opportunities to take in sort of as we adapt to new ways of working going forward.
Great. I mean, from my perspective, thank you to the panel and thank you to all the participants and all the comments and links and intelligence and information that we've gathered through the chat. I'm really hoping, Laurel, that you will have been able to somehow record what's in the chat. I might just try and keep the meeting open to make sure that we've done that at the end so that we can reshare that back out with people. Yeah, maybe Zoom fatigue hasn't got us all. Maybe we've all got a little bit more energy than we thought. But I will wish everyone a very happy Easter and a very happy few days off, hopefully, for everybody. And thank you so much for your engagement today. Hopefully we'll continue this conversation. I've learned a lot. It's been a really useful exchange. We'll try and do something again like this in a couple of months and try and take some action on the back of what's been said today. So thanks very much for joining.
Great, thanks everyone.
Laurel, are you there?
Yep.
Can we save the chat?
Yes, Zoom will save it automatically.
It will. Cool. I didn't know if we could.